Shalom, WJC family. Time for our weekly Torah Talk. This week in Shul, we will be reading Parshat Yitro, which famously includes the Ten Commandments, or the Decalogue, the atthe, right? Not really commandments per se, but utterances, principles. I've been studying this week in preparation for Shabbat, an article first released in June 2013 by Dr. Leon Kass of the University of Chicago, a great Bible scholar and a great thinker. And it's a long article, but worth really picking one's way through it and to see all the interesting takes that Dr. Kass has on sort of this very much oft-repeated and maybe even a little worn text. In fact, the whole point of the article, when Dr. Kass writes it, is to say, we need to look at this again. This is worthwhile. This is important. You think you know what it's about, but maybe you're missing some things. So I wanted to share with you today one such, I thought, just beautiful point that Dr. Kass makes, comparing the commandment to observe Shabbat to the commandment, the last commandment, not to covet your neighbor's things. And he points out something very interesting, which I guess I just never thought to concentrate on before, which is that when God says, the seventh day is a Shabbat to God, you shall not do any work, he then lists a bunch of people who also should not do any work. Atthe, you, uvincha uvitecha, your son or your daughter, avdecha ve'amatcha, your servant or your female servant, uvehemtecha, or your animals, your cattle, v'gercha asher bisharecha, or the stranger who lives among you, maybe a convert, we would later call that. Here, maybe just an outsider, an immigrant, or something to that effect. Good enough. It makes sense that if we're going to observe Shabbat, we should observe the Shabbat for our entire household, all those who labor for us or are responsible for work in the household. Later, though, in the 10th commandment, when the text says, lo tachmod, right, it also lists certain things that you should not covet, right? What's that? Beit re'echa, your neighbor's wife. Your neighbor's house. Lo tachmod eshet re'echa, your neighbor's wife. Ve'avdo, his servant. Ve'amato, his female servant. V'sharo ve'chamoro, his ox or his donkey, right? His livestock again. Ve'chol asher le're'echa, or anything that belongs to him. So interestingly, there's a lot of parallel there, right? Servants and family and livestock. So Dr. Kass asks very, I think, poignantly, these lists overlap. What does observing Shabbat have to do with not coveting, with not being jealous of your neighbor's possessions? So to answer, first we have to figure out what, according to Dr. Kass, at least, this whole Shabbat observance piece is all about. Right? And he would say that Shabbat observance, by carving out time and making it sacred, it is just reorienting how we view the entire world. Right? If we view the world as the most important thing is to build and to collect and to get power and to make sure we have food for the future, then Shabbat doesn't make any sense. To take one day and 1/7 of our time and say, we're not going to use this to support ourselves anymore, doesn't make any sense. Which, says Dr. Kass, is exactly the point. What is so radical about the Decalogue, he would say, is that it shifts this focus. Right? So in Egypt, right, the people come to Moshe and they say, we want to go back to Egypt. At least there we had food. Right? Egypt was a society based on material goods, what you could collect. And that meant always living in fear. Would I have enough? Excuse me. Would I have enough? Would I be able to feed my family? Right? Always, there's never such a thing as enough in such a situation, because what if something happens? What if there's an emergency? And Dr. Kass says, no, Shabbat says, you know what? We can trust. we can put our focus in another place. We can say 1/7 of the time we are not going to work, we're not going to collect stuff, we're not going to worry about where our next meal is coming from, or how much wealth we're going to accumulate, or how much power we're going to accumulate. But instead, we're going to recognize that the world is built in such a way to provide for us, right? This is the message that, Dr. Kass points out, of the manna, getting a double portion on Shabbat, right? The message was, you can rest. God has your back. God will take care of you. And so Dr. Kass says, with Shabbat, by reconfiguring time, elevating our gaze and redirecting our aspirations, Sabbath remembrance promotes internal freedom as well. By moderating the passions that enslave us from within, fear and despair, owing to our belief in lowliness, greed, owing to a belief in the world's inhospitality, and pride and hubris, owing to a belief in our superiority and self-sufficiency, right? And that's, we take for granted. Shabbat, of course, do Shabbat. But Dr. Kass is pointing out what a radical idea that is, especially in the moment that we'll read in the Torah when the Jews are at Sinai getting these 10 utterances, this Decalogue. But even until today, in our society where we're so concerned about pursuing material goods, which brings us back to the end of the Decalogue where we say, Lo tachmod, thou shalt not covet. What's the connection between coveting and Shabbat, made not only because they're both here in the Aseret HaDibrot, in the Decalogue, but also because they have these same family categories that are mentioned, right? You have to let your children and your servants and your animals observe a Shabbat. So too, you shouldn't covet your neighbor's family, wife, house, servants, and animals. So we have this connection. So Dr. Kass says, a man who covets what is his neighbor's suffers, whether he knows it or not, from multiple deformations of his own desire. Not content with his own portion of goodly things, he is incapable of seeing them in their true light, as a means to and participants in a higher way of life. Right? If you're jealous of your neighbor's goods, it means that you're missing the point of living. You think collecting the most toys, the most stuff, the most power is the most important thing. And Dr. Kass is saying the whole point of the Decalogue is to show us something different. And you're coveting the wrong things of your neighbors. His heart is set on the possessions of another because he fails to realize that the things that matter most are not the unshareable things, but the things we and our neighbors have in common. Knowledge of the Lord and what he requires of us, participation in his grace and the bounty of creation, and the opportunity to live a life of blessing and holiness, despite our frailty and penchant for error and iniquity. Our neighbor's aspiration to or possession of these goods in no way interferes with our chances to attain them, right? It doesn't matter how good a relationship your neighbor has with God and the community and sensing sacredness in his life, it doesn't prevent you from having that same positive relationship with God and with that which is sacred in the world, right? When we're jealous, when we're coveting, we are taking it for granted that they have something, and because they have it, I can't. And what Dr. Kass is saying is, no, you're missing the point. The whole point of living the spiritual life that we see by unpacking the 10 Commandments, the Aseret HaDibrot, in this way, is that there is a sacred level upon which to live. And that is something that's limitless. We don't have to be jealous of our neighbors because this is something we can all share. It's been a challenging year to find ways to share Shabbat, to share this special relationship. We can't gather together, or we haven't been able to much gather together in prayer, right? We haven't been able to gather together or much gather together for Shabbat meals and to share that focus on that which is sacred. However, I think we have also learned new ways, right? New ways to to connect with others, whether it's through a video like this, or through Zoom, or learning together, right? A book club kind of a thing where we're doing the same thing at the same time. Knowledge, by the way, another great commodity that we can share and without losing anything. And I think the lesson of this Decalogue, the lesson of this Aseret Hadibrot that we can take from Parsha Yitro this week is that yes, we've all lost a lot during this pandemic, but maybe not the things that we think. Right? There's the material things, and that hurts. But the true loss, the true thing that we should be trying to make up, is this disconnect with our neighbors, this disconnect from that which is spiritual, and we can always find good ways to make that connection. This Shabbat, as we read the Ten Commandments, and every Shabbat and every day, and I hope you'll join us. I hope you'll reach out so that we can live this spiritual life together. Shabbat Shalom.